to Beneath the Skin, the podcast about the history of everything, told through the history of tattoos. My name's Dr. Matt Lodder. I'm here again on my own this week. Thomas is travelling back home to his parents in Ireland for Christmas. So you've got me again as a solo episode. And my name's Dr. Matt Lodder. If this is your first time listening, I'm a tattoo historian, author, curator, and tattoo collector. And for this kind of solo episode today, I wanted to talk to you about something because I had a phone call from a journalist writing for a newspaper in Europe who wanted to ask me about the pigment ban. So for those of you who don't know, in 2022, or actually in 2021, coming into force in 2022, the European Union banned a whole range of particular substances from being used in tattoo inks, as pigments. And that's been kind of grandfathered in that law, whereas you couldn't buy those inks for the last year. They were immediately removed from sale, but as of the 4th of January, actually technically 2023, it's going to be across the European Union illegal to have those pigments in your shop, even basically. And the UK government has, after Brexit, we're no longer bound by EU rules, but there was a lot of talk about grandfathering these rules in. A lot of European safety standards are being grandfathered into UK law. The UK actually had a separate consultation on this. It seems that they're minded to bring in the same regulations. They had a consultation. The consultation ended in November 2022. And I guess we'll wait and see what they say. Although my completely, non-expert opinion on this is that they're likely to just kind of lift the EU rules directly, is my sense. I don't know. But anyway, what I wanted then to talk about today, and kind of use this opportunity today to talk about to you, when I had you all on my own, was to talk about tattoo inks, really, and talk about the history of tattoo inks, talk about some of the different things that have been used for tattoo inks over time, how different pigments have been introduced into tattooing over the century or so, 150 years or so since really kind of multicolored tattooing has really existed, and talk a bit about the kind of science, I suppose, of how tattoo inks work and what the risk profiles and what the risk, what the current scientific evidence shows about actually the toxicity of various pigments, whether or not this EU ban is based on good science, because as we'll talk about, there's some dispute about that. So I guess we'll start off, and the first place to start is how does tattooing work? How does that ink stay in your skin? Because that's the first thing to realize, both on how the chemicals might affect you in a toxicity way, and also what some of the risks might be. So basically, the way tattooing works, the reason tattooing is so magical and permanent in your skin is due to your immune system. I guess you probably heard as a kid or in your biology lessons at school that every single cell of our body is renewed on a certain cycle. And so, given that, how is it that tattoos are permanent? Well, basically what happens is when you put a particle of a substance that your body can't degrade into your skin, your immune system, or to your body in general, I suppose, your immune system kicks in and tries to remove the object from you. It's like if you get a splinter or whatever, your body will try and remove it. In particular, in your skin, you have 3 layers of skin, right? And the middle layer of your skin, the dermal layer, so you've got the epidermis, the dermis, and the subdermis. The dermis, that middle layer of skin, is particularly good for holding tattoo ink, because what happens is you insert the pigment particles into the right layer of skin. Your body's immune system kicks in during the healing process, and your immune system, some cells that are basically called macrophages, will encompass, kind of eat up that particle. And if it's too big to flush out through your immune system, through your lymphatic system, through your lymph nodes, your body will basically just encompass it so that it's, in effect sealed off from the rest of your body and can't cause you any more problems. When those cells, as all cells in our bodies, die, that pigment particle will be released back into the skin, and a new immune cell will come and encompass it again. So that's basically why tattoos blur a little bit over time. And the reason that middle layer in particular is good for holding tattoos is because the regeneration cycle is not too quick. Basically, your epidermal cells, your skin cells on the top of your layer of your skin, basically regenerate much more quickly, and so a tattoo in that layer will basically fade or even disappear very, very quickly. A lot of that kind of micropigmentation, permanent or semi-permanent makeup is done very shallowly because it's not meant to last very long. If you hit the right layer, that tattoo will basically stay with a slight bit of blurring essentially forever. I want to read you a quote actually from this book. It's really, if you're interested in this subject, it's the best book I think in recent years, probably not even recent, probably ever on this topic. It's by a scientist called Michelle Miranda, who's a forensic criminologist actually, and she wrote a book called Forensic Analysis of Tattoos and Tattoo Ink. She works for the New York Police Department, and she wanted to sort of really use forensic science to try and figure out where particular tattoos were made, what kind of ink was used, etc., etc. So it's the best kind of scientific book on the history, on the science of tattoo inks in particular. But the first chapter is about basically how tattoos work in the skin. And she cites actually an article from 1991, and I'll read this in detail. This is from an author called Sperry. The needle penetrates through the epidermis and just into the papillary and reticular dermis, but no deeper. This depth is between 1 and 2 millimeters. During the tattoo process, the pigment is deposited along the length of the needle track throughout the epidermis, and any superficial dermal layers, but only the pigment left within the dermis, will permanently remain, making the final tattoo. As the tissue heals, the superficial epidermal layers peel away, leaving behind the deeper, regenerative basal epidermal layers. Eventually, by sloughing cellular layers during healing, all the pigmented layers of the epidermis are removed, with the exception of the dermis. Over time, the epidermis regenerates, and the epidermal layers grow back to their usual thickness over the pigmented dermal layer. Consequently, the body will react to foreign pigment particles that have been introduced. The pigment particles are assimilated by dermal macrophages, which slowly carry them to the regional lymphatics and thus to the corresponding draining lymph nodes. The macrophages also engulf pigment granules and then migrate short distances within the dermis, in which the majority of pigments will be assimilated by the macrophages, with unassimilated pigment granules remaining within dermal loose fibrous connective tissue between collagen bundles. The effects of healing, exhibited by the diffusion of light by the reformed epidermal layers and subsequent pigment migration, result in a tattoo that appears smooth, diffuse, and hazy. As such, an individual examining a tattoo that has healed and aged will often describe the tattoo as appearing faded. So that's the kind of more technical version of what I just explained. And you can, I guess, immediately start to understand why tattoo inks might cause problems for your body if they are, if they are toxic in various ways. So we know, for example, that tattoos can cause allergic reactions, and particular pigments are more likely to cause allergic reactions than others. Red pigments in particular seem to be quite generative of allergic reactions. And also because they sit in your body for a long time, there is potentially, at least, a risk that they can cause long-term damage or injury or cancer even. So that's basically what the European Union has been concerned about. There's been little regulation actually on tattoo inks, and over the years, as tattoo ink manufacturers become more industrialized, as tattoo ink manufacturers become much more of a big business, I think the EU have become more worried about potential risk profiles. Now, tattoo artists themselves, I think, will tell you that I think in general they are worried about things other than tattoo ink, or other things than the toxicity of particular chemicals in those inks. I think, for example, bacterial infection through contamination of ink is a much more present and pressing issue than the composition of tattoo inks themselves. But nevertheless, I think this is something which, it was sort of inevitable eventually. So the genesis for these regulations in the EU came from a more generalised set of rules about chemicals that are allowed to be used on the body, not just for tattooing, but also for things like hair dye. And as such, I think a lot of the toxicity profiles have been analysed on the basis of things sitting on the outside layer of the skin, on the epidermal layer, when used as hair dye or when used as body paint or as makeup, rather than as things that are inserted into your body that are then encapsulated by your immune system. And unfortunately, the testing and certainly the epidemiology, the long-term scientific studies haven't really taken into account those differences, and we've ended up with a bit of a blanket set of provisions that where something is not approved for use as a hair dye or as a makeup, it's also not approved for use as a tattoo pigment. The other thing to say on that before I move on to talk about some more of the historical stuff here and what tattoo pigments actually are, is to say that there's not been a lot of testing on any of these substances, particularly for tattooing. And some of the pigments, particularly two pigments, one of which is called Blue 15-3 and the other which is called Green 7, which are real base pigments for a lot of other colours. They are, by some estimates, in about 40% of tattoo inks used in Europe, actually were prohibited not because they were definitely toxic, but because the manufacturers hadn't proved evidence to show that they weren't toxic. A lot of the regulation here is based on the fact that no safety data has been provided, and therefore, the presumption is it's not safe until proven otherwise. That's a general regulatory approach that the EU and the UK, I suppose, as well, has taken to all kinds of other things. You have to prove it's safe before you can use it, rather than using it, waiting for stuff to go wrong, and then having to withdraw it from the market. There's this kind of proactive pre-clearance process. So there was some work, back in 2020 when these bans were first being mooted, by the German Institute for Federal Risk Assessment, the BFR, Bundesinstitut für Risikobewertung, and they basically said about these two pigments, Blue 15-3 and Green 7, that there were some concerns that certain hair dyes could cause bladder cancer. So the EU Commission launched a programme in which all hair dyes were to be assessed by the European Commission's Scientific Committee on Consumer Safety. As a result of this activity, the two pigments, Blue 15-3 and Green 7, were added to the list of prohibited substances and thus banned from use in hair dyes. However, this listing of both pigments is not based on negative health risk assessment, but instead on the fact that no dossiers have been submitted by the pigment manufacturers. Manufacturers could apply to have their substances removed from this annex of the cosmetics regulation, which would enable their use in hair dyes. This would require the submission of appropriate data to clarify suspicions about the substance's hazardous properties. And actually then the BFR did their own testing and basically said, as far as we're concerned, the health risk data for both pigments is incomplete. The available data should be improved for both pigments. Currently available data only show a comparatively low level of toxicity for both substances. And despite that, coming from the German risk assessment, those pigments actually were banned. There's a big ongoing petition. You can find them on Instagram, Save the Pigments, and they also put a specific petition through to the European Union about these two pigments in particular. But essentially, suppliers have been basically frantically seeking to reformulate their pigments because the petition wasn't successful. So I also recommend people have a look, and I've been really grateful to read this, the website of Nordic Tattoo Supplies, who have been really hot on this, who have been really, really trying to design new inks and ensure that they are certified for use in the European Union, both inks that they're manufacturing and inks that they're importing from the United States. So that's kind of where we're at. I should also say the current data on particularly the kind of carcinogenicity of tattoo inks is quite limited. There actually is some preliminary sense that maybe some tattoo pigments increase slightly the risk of cancer, although there was a review back in 2012 which was done essentially by some cancer scientists, and this was published in the journal. Let me get this right. The journal Lancet Oncology, so big mainstream serious cancer journal 10 years ago. In 2012 by lead author Nicholas Kluger. And that paper basically said, quote, "We extensively reviewed the literature and found 50 cases of skin cancer on tattoos, 23 cases of squamous cell carcinoma and keratocanthoma, 16 cases of melanoma, and 11 cases of basal cell carcinoma. The number of skin cancers arising in tattoos is seemingly low, and thus this association has to be considered as coincidental." So basically, millions and millions of people get tattooed and have been getting tattooed for a long time. However, as they say, in the past 40 years, roughly 50 cases of malignant melanoma, basal cell carcinoma, and squamous cell carcinoma associated with tattoos have been reported. So only this was 10 years ago, but only 40 cases specifically reported. And obviously millions and millions and millions of people getting tattooed. So this is just, as far as they're concerned, in that last review, basically coincidental. There's no clear relationship. There was also a review in the Journal of Cancer Epidemiology more recently in 2020, and in fact I think the pressure from these European Union regulations has increased the interest in this research. But essentially that review says that there is some evidence of toxicological hazard, but epidemiological work on the safety of tattoo inks and systemic diseases, including cancer, is only starting now. They also say in humans, the exposure and long-term effects of tattoo inks after subcutaneous administration are not known, since potential health effects of tattooing remained unrecognised. Ironically as well, in looking through this data, I did also find some research which suggested that having black tattoos might actually prevent you getting skin cancer. In mice, at least, black tattooed mice, which is pretty metal, isn't it? Black tattooed mice were much less likely to succumb to skin cancer. So, pros and cons there. I think basically don't worry, essentially, and as long as you're getting tattooed from by a good tattoo artist using a fresh pot of ink, you haven't really got a lot to worry about. People have been tattooing themselves for millions of, not millions of years, thousands of years, potentially tens of thousands of years, and it seems that the human body is pretty resilient. So on that, right, let's talk about, in that case, on the thousands of years, what is the history of tattoo inks? Well, essentially, most really kind of historic tattoo was black, almost exclusively. And those inks were primarily made from some form of carbon. So from carbon black, basically, a kind of pigment derived from ash or soot. This is, basically used in printer ink right up until the middle of the 19th century. It was used as ink for paint. It was generally a kind of all-purpose black pigment. Otzi the Iceman, the oldest known preserved tattooed specimen that we have from 5,500 years ago, his tattoos appear to be made from basically kind of carbon, soot, and also perhaps from ash. one of the earliest tattooing recipes we have from the 6th century. This Greek writer called Iletus basically says about ink in Egypt. So ink is described from tattooing made from Egyptian pine wood, corroded burned bronze or brass, gall and vitriol. So the kind of carrier medium is also, what makes ink. It's pigment in a suspension. So gall there is basically like, bile from a gallbladder. And once mixed and ground into powder, mixed with water and leek juice. In some places in the world, particularly in the Pacific, actually, ink was made from nuts. So in Samoa, they use llama nuts in coconut baskets, baked them in underground ovens, crack the nuts with stones and thread them together as they do when they make a torch. They light the torch inside a hearth. The torch emits a black, oily smoke which settles as soot on the stone. The Samoans scrape the soot onto a banana leaf and then store it in a coconut shell. That's a quote from Ballack and Cox, 1996. So really, contemporary black pigments haven't changed a lot, actually. Like most contemporary black tattoo pigments are also very roughly of this same kind of type. The other colour that we find in ancient tattooing is red. Much rarer, but occasionally we find red tattooing, and in pre-Meiji contact, or certainly pre-20th century Japanese tattooing, we really find almost exclusively black and red. So the red comes from either from animal sources, from insects, for example, but primarily from what a mineral pigment called cinnabar, mercury sulfide. Pretty nasty, actually, kind of bad for that is pretty bad for your body, pretty toxic. We know from some really early how to tattoo guides, even in the professional era in Britain, those red inks, cinnabars were being suggested. In the 1830s, this is from Al Parry's book, as early as 1835, here, as well as abroad, this is in the United States, as well as abroad, a mixture of cinnabar and red lead was used to bring the colour to the cheek in certain cases of superficial birthmarks. After the birthmarks were eliminated by surgery, the middle of the cheek was tattooed a delicate pink. So most of that permanent makeup tattooing was a kind of red mercury cinnabar pigment until the modern period. That's basically it, right? We've got blacks and reds. In the 19th century, tattooing starts to become modern, so it starts to become more kind of commercialized, and that drives this desire for coloured tattooings. So the main driver of this in the UK is my boy Sutherland MacDonald. Sutherland MacDonald described essentially developing colours from the early part of the 20th century or late part of the 19th century. In an article, it's described as, quote, he developed new colours from soluble minerals: ultramarine for blues, burnt sienna for browns, cuttlefish for blacks. Actually, that would probably come out a bit more brown in the skin. Cinnabar for red, and a secret recipe of his own devising for green ink derived from a green stone. Only a good, non-toxic yellow eluded him. In the search for yellow ink, after having tested a particular formula on himself, he was forced to cut chunks out of his arm to alleviate the toxic reaction. And actually, in these adverts from the 19th century in London, you see a kind of arms race, right? Where it will begin with 4 colours, tattooing in 4 colours, tattooing in 5 colours, tattooing in 7 colours, and then very quickly tattooing in all colours. The other really interesting innovation here, sort of famously, I suppose, is purple ink. So Sailor Jerry, again, kind of legend of the industry, he takes credit for introducing purple tattooing ink to the world, and particularly to the Japanese. So as we know, Sailor Jerry's working in Hawaii. very interested and very influential in the kind of revival of Japanese tattooing in the middle, sort of first decades of the 20th century. And in a few letters to Ed Hardy from the 70s, he sort of talks about this. So, May the 10th, 1971, Sailor Jerry says, "We have the advantage of colour over the Japs." Pardon the historic language there. "We still overlook the fact that black can be even more smashing than colour when shaded out. They have to work it as they don't have colour. We pass it because we have colour. I don't think we're missing the boat." And in fact, yeah, it is trade or contact with European tattooing in this late 19th, early 20th century period, which brings colour into Japanese tattooing other than the black and the red. And then this clearly sort of begins a conversation. Ed and Norman, Colin, Sailor Jerry are having this conversation. The letters are published in Ed's book, American Tattoo Master. Really, really great kind of collection of letters between the two guys. And in that, he also says about colours. So he says, "Flatelo green and white was my discovery. I gave it to Pop Eddie and Joe Lieber, and now everyone uses it as a standard procedure. I brought out purple, and so far, damn few have that, and that's the way it should be. Anyone can get good colour, but damn few can get it in, and that's where we hold the edge and have to keep it. When I put a job on next to a grey and pink Tuttle special, I really load in the colour to show them up for what they are. I don't knock the work or the tattooer, just put on the work that makes even the blind customer realise he's been fucked over, but good." Ed Hardy didn't like Lyle Tuttle. Sorry, Ed Hardy did like Lyle Tuttle. Sailor Jerry didn't like Lyle Tuttle. In fact, Ed finds it quite funny because he's quite a fan and confidant of Tuttle, but Jerry really doesn't like Lyle Tuttle at all.
Hey, are you enjoying the show? If you really like Beneath the Skin and you want to help support us, you can do so on Patreon. For little as £5 a month, you can help make this show possible, help us buy research materials. So if you like the show and you want to support us, consider kicking us a few quid a month. And you'll get everything from bonus episodes to Q&As, and you can even vote on what tattoo I'll get when we reach a certain subscriber count. Matt, have you got anything to say?
You should really definitely fund the Patreon because tattoo history is massive, right? Deep, wide, complicated. We're covering some big hit topics on the main feed, but on the Patreon subscriber-only feed, we'll be getting into some really more interesting, niche, deep topics you don't want to miss out on. And honestly, the chance to kind of decide what Thomas gets on his body is probably just a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Subscribe, chuck us a few quid. Don't miss out on the chance to ruin Thomas's body forever.
Everyone knows that tattoo aftercare is one of the most important steps in getting a new tattoo. We all want our fresh new tattoos to heal as easily and hassle-free as possible so we can show them off to the world.
That's why Sanoderm's here to help. Driven by science and innovation, Sanoderm products have been thoroughly tested and used by doctors and tattoo artists alike for over 10 years.
Sanoderm brings cutting-edge technology to make your tattoo healing process a breeze. No more messing around with cleaning and plastic every few hours with Sanoderm's amazing range of aftercare products. I personally have used Sanoderm to heal my tattoos in the past, and they made what used to be a daily process of setting reminders on my phone to clean and rewrap my tattoo into a one-step process.
Their medical-grade products include aftercare balms, soaps, and my favourite, their second skin aftercare bandages. Sanoderm's tattoo bandages are designed to be waterproof, breathable, and keep your new tattoo protected from whatever the elements can throw at it, so you can get on with your day, worry-free, and confident your new tattoo will look vibrant and will heal faster.
Plus, their products are all natural and ethically sourced, so you can take comfort in knowing that you're healing your tattoos with nature's finest ingredients.
So next time you're in an artist's chair, why not try Sanoderm, healing your tattoos the modern way so you can get on with your day.
Check out the link in the description of this episode for discounts on a range of Sanoderm products or for more information. Jerry
actually kind of credits working with a guy called Bob Palm, who was a tattooist who also had a major in chemistry, studied chemistry at Columbia University. Basically, as you know, also one of the key kind of collaborators on this. Ed Hardy in particular actually refers to Bob Palm's collaboration with Sailor Jerry on things like this purple pigment. And yeah, it's super interesting to think about, the kind of intersection, I guess, between kind of science, artistry, and kind of like lunacy, right? Like with McDonald, lots of these pigments, if you would try them out for the first time as a tattooer, you'd have to kind of try them out on your own skin. And yeah, Jerry also kind of writes to Ed. This is a great story. So he says, none of these things should ever be tried out on anybody but yourself. I had a patch of violet on my leg that raised hell for 3 years. I got a sample of hot booster with bright chroma that should beat anything we hit yet. We'll stick it in my leg and give you a report on the reaction. Damn these dark reds, they just die in the skin. It don't have the chroma to stand up against light, but I think I've got a good one. Then later on he follows up, quote, red spot on my leg healing clean, no irritation. So if it stays in and holds its chroma, it'll be better than our present booster. So yeah, like basically trying out these kind of things, seeing whether they heal, seeing how they react to sunlight, seeing if they what they look like, seeing if actually they kind of settle down in the skin. This is something which, yeah, is like, part science, part art, and part kind of craziness. You just got to be willing to kind of slam it in there and see what happens. And I think, yeah, like we've really got like artists like Sailor Jerry and even like earlier innovators like McDonald or like Armand Dietzel, who was also kind of experimenting with yellows, to really thank for really trying to push forward the craft and the art of tattooing. The other thing I guess it's worth saying at this point is that, and sort of is alluded to, I guess, in those Sailor Jerry letters, is that once you had a good recipe, you kind of keep it to yourself, or you'd share it judiciously amongst people that you liked. Like a lot of the early days of tattooing was about, networking and about kind of secrets and finding a good recipe, finding a good formula for a particular color or a good supplier of a particular pigment was one of the things that like good tattooers would keep to themselves, right? Would kind of, would really kind of be a real, I don't know, mark of quality, a mark of particularity. Yeah, like people like Zeiss would, in their kind of how to tattoo kits, would give you instructions perhaps on how to make some of the inks and some advice on how to make some particular colors. But again, as Ed Hardy says, right, quote, 8 colors were considered a full palette. Only a few shops in the world offered that. You had to sleuth around to get the pigments. The tattoo suppliers had some okay stuff, but you really had to contact pigment manufacturers. If you said to them you were using it to tattoo, they wouldn't sell it to you, so you had to lie to them. And so, yeah, like this becomes, and John Writer's got a bit about this in his book as well, about George Burchett, about Armand Dietzel. Like there's a real, the colours you had in the early part of the professional industry was like a real mark of, how good a tattooer you were, how credible you were, how kind of, just how committed and serious you were about what you were doing, I suppose, right? Essentially, these guys were making their own pigments. So now Tattoo Ink is pretty much exclusively ready mixed. I know that I think Lal Hardy said on his Instagram this week that essentially, like all all of the suppliers of powdered pigments have now disappeared, and you can only buy pre-mixed. So essentially, you buy these powder pigments. Either from specialist tattoo suppliers or earlier, actually just from the same people that sold powder pigments to artists, to painters. There's a very famous shop in London called Corneliusson's, and everyone from George Burchett to Jesse Knight went to that shop. It was on Great Russell Street, still there actually. This great kind of pigment shop where you go and buy powdered pigments and then mix them up into tattoo ink. Mix them with potentially vodka. Actually, Lal says on his Instagram this week, we used to get colour powder mixed with Listerine, vodka, rose water, even drops of washing up liquid. And he cites, also Lal cites an amazing letter on his Instagram this week from a guy called Ted Boswell, who developed a coral pink. So in the advert for this, Boswell says, "For many years, both suppliers and artists alike have tried to find a good pink tattoo colour. To date, a few ghastly shades have been tried and discontinued. Most artists still mix red and white to obtain pink, and as you may be aware, it's far from satisfactory to both tattoo artist and customer making and using pink in this way. I have now, at no small cost, again engaged my colour consultant to make up what might be the first pink, finest pink available for use in tattooing. I've called it Coral Pink." And yeah, Lau on his Instagram this week talked very, very lyrically about buying supplies from Ted back in the 1980s. Then we kind of get off to the races. Now we have mass-produced tattoo inks, and again, I really recommend, if you're interested in the kind of nerdy hyper detail of this, get Michelle Miranda's book, because she does, literally goes into detail of the chemical analysis of every single color, the spectroscopy, the X-ray fluorescence, all of the kind of very specific color ranges that you can get in modern tattooing, and to really, really push this forward. We're now in, complete kind of contemporary materials science, trying to get the right mix of pigment, biocompatibility, and kind of ease of use, I suppose, in the skin. I think it also remains to be seen, what effect this ban has on what tattoos look like. I'm sure, it was sort of dumped on suppliers very quickly, these rules, but they seem to have adapted very, very quickly. I want to finish this conversation with three innovations. So there's not been a huge amount of innovation, I suppose, really, in basically we're still sort of putting pigment particles into carrier liquids into the skin. Various different artists are kind of using different source pigments, but we're ending up with more or less the same thing. There are three, I think, exceptions to that. One is the brief trend for glow in the dark tattoos. So there was a brief moment in the 90s, right? So these pigments, which are basically kind of fluorescent, you will shine light on them and they literally glow in the dark. And some tattooers were starting to develop those or play with them back in the 90s. And they were using pigments with phosphorus in them. So phosphorus, again, not very good for your skin, would cause itching, would cause irritation, would not heal very well. Putting it under black light and it would glow. Really, really not a good idea to put it into your skin. However, some recent ink manufacturers have started to develop new pigments, I would say, which don't have those phosphorus in them. Really isn't so based on those really, really difficult and really horrible things. But I would say, avoid it basically, because there isn't a lot of data on tattoo inks generally. I think the glowing stuff is probably not a great idea. The other perhaps innovation or not. It's not really innovation. I'm sure it's been going on forever. But other thing that people talk about a lot when we talk about inks is ash, kind of cremains, using remains of loved ones into ink. I know that tattooers generally, many of them aren't really fans of that, because you certainly can't guarantee that it's sterilized. Even if it's been through a crematorium, it's not necessarily going to have been kept in a way that's safe to put in the skin and not at risk of rejection. It's really hard to grind it up small enough to use as an ink, and it's difficult to tattoo with. I know that lots of tattooers really aren't fans of using cremains as tattoo ink, although some will do it with the understanding that you understand what you're getting yourself in for. And then the third thing, and this is really, really new, like literally kind of cutting edge right now, is this stuff developed by Bang Bang, a tattoo artist based out of New York. Really, really incredible. Certainly, his shop or shops in New York are just incredible in terms of the artists that work there. Like people, people will have sometimes have things to say about the particular kind of way in which he presents himself as a celebrity tattooer. I think tattooers in the West forever have done that, or some of them have. So I'm not critical of that at all. And in fact, I've helped, full disclosure, help Bang Bang and his shop on a few occasions with visa applications for their artists. And it's clear that is a shop about which, where they are serious about tattooing and they're serious about the art. The artists that work there are just incredible. And if celebrities are getting tattooed there, then at least they're going to get good tattoos. But Bang Bang has developed or has kind of funded the development of, I suppose, this ink called Magic Ink, which is like photosensitive. So you basically fire a particular wavelength of light at it, and it will change color. It was basically initially developed, or the pigment initially was developed as a scientific tool for surgical procedures. Right, the idea was that you could alert yourself to overexposure of UV light. It's developed by these team of scientists at the Atlas Institute of the University of Colorado, right? That they sort of want to create this kind of biomedical utility. But actually, Bang Bang realized you could do stuff with this creatively. So the first bottle of it sold with an NFT. Again, I'm skeptical of that as a thing, but why not? As a marketing gimmick, fine. And basically, what happens, and I think this is going to be, we're going to see more of it this year, and we'll see how well it works and what it ends up looking like and how it ends up working in the skin. You have a little, red tattoo, let's say. You shoot white light at it just with a flashlight, and it disappears, and then you can bring it back again with UV. So it's this particular kind of chemical property of the pigment particles that allow it to change color with particular wavelengths of light. Again, I don't think we're going to see big rollout of that. I think it's an interesting creative project, and it's the kind of thing which everyone getting involved with that is going to kind of have a sense of what they're getting themselves in for. I don't think we're going to be seeing this in any kind of widespread adoption, not even as widespread as the, in my opinion, quite problematic and probably quite, unpleasant in the skin UV tattooing from the 90s. So that's where we're at, in some senses, we've come a long way. If you think about that, we've come a long way from Otzi's tattooer sitting around a fire, grinding up bits of charcoal. On the other end, really that's still more or less what contemporary tattoo pigments are. They are chemical compounds, mineral pigments by and large, in order to which reflect light to create certain colors. And been a lot of hue and cry, a lot of worry, I think, about what the effect of this colour pigment ban in the EU would brought in, but it seems that the manufacturers have adapted. I mean, also, of course, like the enforcement of this is going to be another thing. Like, will the people investigating tattoo studios understand even what they're looking at? Given that I know from colleagues of mine who work in tattoo shops in the UK. Given that many of those inspectors don't even know what an autoclave is, I'd be surprised if there's a lot of real hardcore enforcement of this. But nevertheless, it seems like the industry's adapting, and in fact, potentially even if the big manufacturers, the big kind of industrial manufacturers of tattoo pigments wanted to, they could probably do safety tests and get these off the annex anyway. Yeah, and we'll see what happens in the UK, right? As I said, the consultation ended in November. I guess we'll hear probably in the spring to what degree these rules are going to be rolled in, and also, you know, at the end of the day, although there are plenty of other things, I think if we were serious about the safety of tattooing for the public, we'd be worried about before the composition of pigments, things like, you know, home tattooing, reuse of needles by home tattooers, the availability of tattoo machines, cheap tattoo machines on Amazon. As I said, kind of risk of bacterial infection, which is much more straightforward and obvious than long-term cancer risks from mineral pigment. If we were serious about that, I think regulation would look quite different. But at the end of the day, we all want tattooing to be safe. We all want tattooing to be healthy. We don't want to put ourselves at risk. And I don't think the EU handled this very well. It's certainly kind of clumsy. It's a bit of a hammer to crack a nut. It assumes that keeping chemicals on the skin is the same as putting them in the skin, etc. But I think we should be, at least happy that at some level someone's now paying attention to the safety of tattooing. The last thing to say on this actually is about lasering. So one of the other causes for, I think, the kind of urgency of this is, and the confounding factors is, if these pigments are safe while they're in the skin, in those macrophages, are they safe when they are removed? And with the increasing popularity of tattoo removal through laser, this also becomes a bit more of a pressing issue. So the way lasering works is it bursts those macrophages apart. It breaks down those pigment particles to small enough that they can be removed by your immune system, and your immune system can flush them out. It's why, as we mentioned on one of our previous episodes, it is very possible to die from lasering if you have too much of it in one go, because your immune system can get overwhelmed. And actually, it may be the case that whilst certain pigments are safe in your skin, they may not be safe in smaller particulate form running through your immune system. And so, again, perhaps with the increase of laser technology, this is going to be something which we should get out ahead of. So watch this space. I think if you're a tattoo artist, you'll know more about this already, particularly if you're in the EU, because you'll have been having to deal with it. Pay attention to people like Nordic tattoo suppliers who are dealing with it, on a manufacturing and importation point of view. And those of you that are in the UK, keep your eye on the Health and Safety Executive website. It's called UK REACH. Restriction proposals, substances and groups of substances that pose a risk to human health if they're present in tattoo inks and permanent makeup. It's on the Health and Safety Executive website, hse.gov.uk. Keep an eye on that, because I think we'll be getting the results of that probably in the spring. So, let's, in the meantime, stay safe, stay healthy, have a happy Christmas. I hope this was interesting, both historically and as a sort of, breaking news item. And thanks everyone to listening. Thanks to our patrons. We're going to suspend our offer of sending out free copies of the book at the top tier, because I'm not going to post any until mid-January. I'm off on my honeymoon. Those of you that have subscribed at our £15 tier will already have been sent your copy of Painted People. So that will be in the post. I think we're up to date with that for everyone that's kindly subscribed. And we'll resume that, let you know, in mid-January. We've got some episodes in the pipeline to come out before then. And we'll be back to our regular schedule. So thank you so much. Thank you again to Tom for editing this. Have a lovely Christmas. Stay well. Stay colourful. And I'll see you all in the new year. Cheers. Bye-bye.